Sketchy neckbeard turned single player RP into catgirl creepfest. A few years back, I put out a call for players on FB and got a bunch of replies from people who wanted to play but had a hard time finding a DM. Perfect, I thought. The player numbers started to wind down while figuring out scheduling, as is expected. But I had one player who really wanted to play the game but couldn't make scheduling work, so he suggested an asynchronous single player game. Sounded easy enough, I could reply on my own time. So why not? Now I know why not. So I'm a young woman, was in my mid-20s at the time, and this player was a guy I met at an AninCon who seemed friendly enough. I hate to call that alone a red flag, but in hindsight, it kinda was. I tell him the basic premise, it's RPFQ's D&D 5e, but with themes of cosmic horror. In a homebrew setting, weird portals are opening up around the starter town, and he has to figure out how to close them before anything too dangerous gets through. Since he was playing by himself, instead of with a full party, I told him that I'd fill the setting with different NPCs he could recruit for his adventures. His first question, can I build relationships with the NPCs? I replied that of course you can, it's an RP heavy game. And your actions and conversations can get NPCs to trust you more. No, I mean romantic relationships. I raised an eyebrow and said that some NPCs could possibly respond to romantic gestures depending on the character and how it's role-played. I generally don't have an issue with PC-PC or PC-NPC relationships, after all, but they're not the main focus by any means. You're okay with adult content, right? I immediately saw where this was heading and told him this may not be the kind of RPG he's looking for. This was a magic adventure RPG, not a dating sim. He insisted he was just asking out of curiosity, then asked a lot of questions about NPC appearances, including if any were anthropomorphic and how old they were, pretty much alluding to are they hot/cat girls and legal? At least I hope that adult age is the answer he was looking for. I blocked him on Discord and FB. I'm glad I shut him down fast and that he showed his true intentions before we actually started playing. The other group that I'm running the game for, they've been playing for 4 years, now are getting into high levels of play and uncovering the deeper plot points I set up, have become good friends, and 2 of them are getting married later this month. I can only imagine how the creep would have derailed this wonderful group with his catgirl spank bank goals. Made a character cry by accident when his character died. So the party I was main for was attacked by kobolds during the night after a long day of fighting in the mountains trying to clear out a colony of them. This was a planned ambush and I have them a short rest out of it instead of a long rest. During the fight the ranger was downed and down to doing death saves. The other 4 party members fled the scene with the exception of the wizard who had levitated up into a tree to hide and observed the following scene. I didn't want to kill off the character and decided to let the character have all his saves regardless of what was going on. And he passed and got up surrounded by kobolds. He then fought them one by one being felled time and time again, killing off 4 of the 10 remaining until he finally failed his death saves. With his fresh corpse on the ground the kobolds left alive ate the body breaking the bones in their teeth and crunching his cartilage into dust. Now it was at this point I noticed a very disturbing sound. It sounded exactly as I described, a crunching, tearing, chomping sound. Unknown to me, my wife had given my 2 Dachshund terriers some pig ears a couple minutes before, and they snuck under the table to eat them while the fight was going on. So the death scene came with full gory sound effects. Oops. DM should have probably checked my attacks. So we had an encounter with 4 very powerful bandits in the middle of the woods. One downed me after I took him to bloodied with a bunch of monk attacks. So the man yanked the sword from my character. When I lucked out on saving throws and got up, he replied, "Aha, you can't do anything now. I have your weapon." My sword did 1d8 plus 4. My unarmed strikes are 1d8 plus 4. The sword was just sentimental to the character. So I went. The monk got visibly upset. Possibly the most upset the group has seen from the small monk pivoting his tiny legs into a defensive position. He takes a martial arts stance. I'd like to use flurry of blows and I'll start with stunning strike with each attack until it succeeds. Enemy fails a saving throw. Enemy is stunned and all attacks against him gained advantage. All the hits that failed were met with me using my lucky feat to roll a success. I've never seen a DM gasp in disbelief so hard in my life. Turns out there was supposed to be reinforcement in a few turns. Except, they didn't, because my monk attacks annihilated and stunned their leader. The DM pulled us into a meeting after the session was over. Hey, I might not be able to play next week. That was the bad guy that was going to be a major part of the next 5 sessions. He was supposed to show up and show off how powerful he was in a brutal battle with the group and escape. He wasn't expecting immediate step of the wind use in move 1, flurry of blows, and stunning strikes to change that. The campaign group was quietly dissolved. We stayed friends and still laugh about it sometimes. When is it right to let a player do a fatal move or simply saying no? We were playing a survival apocalypse game, and I made it clear the game was gonna be unforgiving. I had players roll up characters and said I'd let them do any character if they could BS a good enough backstory. A player decided his awesome story is a mutant talking dog. Nothing special, just a dog that talks. I explained this might go badly in a gunfight. He replied, nah, it will be okay, I'll just dodge and give myself high AC. So we did a quick scene to test his idea out. 3 bandit point L, 1 with a shotgun and 2 with rifles. Level 3, critically low HP, no armor bought, and he gets the first move. What does he do? I run up and bite the middle rifle guy on the arm. Immediately gets shot by the other 2 bandits and dies. He got upset and felt it was unfair, purposefully made to kill his character, not realizing it was a random enemy combat scene I had saved and wanted to simply show him how hard it could be. I'll let him remake the character into the mythology's Michigan Dogman Grippet so he could continue fighting, but I've thought about this situation a lot. I love giving players freedom on characters, but when is it too far? When it hurts the group combat? When they get killed off immediately? I gave Hav the chance to add more to his character, but he only wanted a talking dog. DM routinely adds 23 additional dice rolls after a player succeeds on a check to ultimately give them no information. Example: player, I'm looking for rats in the cellar. I want to speak with animals about. Insert quest here. Players at table, excited because our druid has not gotten to use this ability at all in our urban setting so far. DM, roll perception to see if you see any rats. Player, 22. DM, okay, if there are any rats here, you see them. Let me roll percentile dice to determine if there actually are any rats. Though rolls under whatever arbitrary target he set, this is the most annoying part of the story to me. And he constantly does 2-factor rolls like this. DM, okay, you see some rats. Make an animal handling check to make sure you don't scare them off as you approach them. Speak with animals would not require her to approach the animals, but whatever. Player, 17. DM, okay, cast your spell. What do you ask the animals? Player, did a person matching this description come through here? Failing that, who or what have the rats seen or heard in the past 24 hours? DM, make a persuasion check. At this point, the player has spotted the animals, used magic to communicate with them, used animal handling to appear non-threatening, and is still being asked for persuasion for the most basic of information. Player, 23. DM, the rats don't have anything to offer you. They are just rats in a cellar. Like, just say there's no rats if we are supposed to dead end here. Player crushed all her ridiculous checks, burnt a spell, and got nothing for it. Not lore, not a side quest breadcrumb, not a fun roleplay interaction, just nothing. This quest was the main plot hook BTW, not some random thing we were poking around for. We dead-ended on the investigation and went back to our shelter where the NPC gave us the right lead to continue on. A bridge not far enough. Our game is great. We have been playing GURPS Fantasy for a few months and the GM is fantastic. He made the world up, and it is detailed, and he really knows how to write adventures. Why don't you join? With that invitation I decided to come over, unsure I would have the time, and I took over an NPC for the session to just have some fun. I would decide later whether to commit or not. We had just defeated a group of flaming skeleton guards near a deep chasm. On the other side was another tunnel leading on, guarded by a statue. As the last skeleton falls, the GM says, out of the mist a bridge begins to appear across the chasm. One of the players whose character was played as really heroic and first into battle type announces, "I cross the bridge." Like a now classic cliche, the GM says, "Are you sure?" But this happened many years ago, so it was not quite the meme it is now. So the player proudly announced his character would charge across the bridge. "Okay," the GM says, an excited quality appearing in his voice, one of almost joy. "I said the bridge was forming, not formed. Your character falls to his death." The weird part is that which was, according to the other players, out of nowhere. The GM had been fair in everything before this with no problems, and so I think the player never thought the GM would just outright kill his character on a technicality. Nothing in the campaign that had been going on for a while would make the player think the GM would do this. Well, I didn't have to decide to commit to the game, because it ended there, in what rose from the player thinking it was a joke, to a shouting match, and, at least for a while, the end of a friendship between the player and Grams. They patched it up later as, "Come on, it is just a game." I chalk it up to being kind of young and still a bit immature. But as Alanis Morissette sang, "You live, you learn." TW, suicide mention. What if instead of a mystery you just made a really stupid decision? So I'm playing Ingenious, the Sin Eaters game, new to the system and lore. Basically your character is someone who is brought back from the dead by a mysterious ghost, who wants to find out who they were in life, and I write up a backstory for my character. Basically, they are bereaved and have the belief that they'll be reunited with their loved one if they manage to avenge their murder, though my character isn't actually sure their loved one was murdered. Before my character's death they were sort of getting heavy into occult texts in a bid to find any way to connect with their dead loved one. They hadn't had much success as a magician, but my backstory idea was that this time they managed to summon something. They don't know what, and one of their shorter term goals was to find out entity it was that killed them. My storyteller is like, "Yeah, does your character have a reason to want to be immortal?" And I, trying to be a good and cooperative player, am like, "I guess they might have some idea about reincarnation, or finding a way to bring back their loved one, if they have enough time." And my storyteller's like, "Well, there's this super elaborate ritual, but if it doesn't work your character basically just killed themselves and that's how they end up making the deal with the gist." And so we end up role playing this out with a couple of NPCs who tell my character, "Wow, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard. And there's absolutely no reason really for you to want to be immortal if you want reunion with your dead loved one. Also the ritual is literally just to kill yourself." And I'm like increasingly uncomfortable and having my character ask more and more questions to try and get some reason, any reason for them to do this. The best I get is, "Well, anything's possible, could work." But I agreed to this. We are over an hour into the roleplay of awkward conversation between strangers. After having the DM force my character to interrupt their character's conversation with a ghost, rather than allowing them to wait politely, they could see ghosts even prior to death, which was why they approached the NPC. And so we don't even roleplay out the death scene, so I can maybe find some sense or motivation in it there. But instead, it's just, "Well, you're sorta dead now. You should probably join the other recently sorta dead peeps in fighting evil," or whatever. This has taken my character from a person making bad choices as a result of their desperate desire to see their beloved again to IDK might as well off myself to see if it'll make me immortal. I'm dreading the first full session. DM doesn't support PvP but only selectively. I was reading a post and it reminded me of another terrible game. This was in my 3.x days. It was a faceta-face game, remember those? At a friend's house, I had chosen to play a half-orc sorcerer who was also devoutly religious to Aladamara, god of mischief Ike. Another player, upon learning of my choice, rolled up a cleric, specifically also of Aladamara. I didn't think anything of this at the time. Then the campaign starts. This cleric keeps passing notes to the DM who reads them, smiles and or chuckles. Then the game goes on. Minutes later, I'm having an interaction, trying to persuade or intimidate, usually when I'm suddenly seized by terror, or I start speaking gibberish, or I piss myself, etc. Turns out Mr. Cleric is using his god-given powers to make me look like a fool. At first I'm completely confused, but I'm able to use some rolls to figure out who's doing this to me. I mostly try to ignore this and move on. That is, until the cleric casts magical terror on me in combat, causing me to run headlong into a group of bugbears and almost die. At this point, I'm so completely done. I pass a note to the DM. Prepared action. The next time the cleric opens his mouth, I cast Fireball with his position as ground zero. The DM frowns and immediately reveals my note. He says I don't allow PvP at my table. Me, with the most fed up expression on my face. So what do you call what he's doing to me? That last spell almost got me killed. DM. That's just harmless fun, in line with how his character would act. Even if you died, he would have brought you back. Me. Well, I have a scroll of revive in my pack. If this kills him, I'll bring him back. I cast Fireball on him. DM. You can't. I won't allow it. Me. Then I cast Dimension Door. DM. You don't know that spell. Me. Oh but I do. This here I gesture to his house. Is your dimension. And right there I gesture to his front door. Is the door. I stormed over to it, yanked it open, screamed "GOF yourselves," and slammed it behind me. Haven't spoken to any of them since.